Thank you so much for being here with us at Game Thinking Live.
Thanks for having me, Amy.
I'm really thrilled you could be with us. You're actually one of my heroes.
Oh, well, that is very, very kind of you to say.
Well, I love your insights, and I'm so excited to share them with everyone. So let's start off with, tell us what you're doing right now, because I know you're exploring some really interesting space.
So right now, I'm kind of working on a number of things. As an entrepreneur, I've been doing a lot of research into launching my own rug company. So that's been really, really interesting. And then I also do some advising for startups. And one of those is a food company called FoodWorks, working in sort of the commissary kitchen space and food incubator space. So I do some advising for them as well. The two main things that have been taking up a lot of my time these days.
Awesome. I look forward to hearing more about that. I want to start, though, with your experience at Kickstarter. You were a very early employee. You were, not fresh out of school, but pretty close to it. Had just really started working in tech fairly recently. And you grew Kickstarter through many different phases, working in the community and really shaping it and watching how it evolved. So tell us about how that went for you and kind of what some of your struggles were along the way, the places where, looking back, if I had known then what I know now, kind of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Kickstarter is an interesting company because we were very fortunate in that the business and sort of idea of crowdfunding for creative projects really took off. It was very much right time, right place, but also a product that was very simple and worked well. And so for me, working on that early community side, much of what we did was really helping people figure out this brand new way of raising money on the internet and helping them figure out how to do it well, helping them understand, the ins and outs of this process, but also helping people really get that Kickstarter wasn't supposed to just be a creative project ATM. This was really about using the product to kind of, whiteboard an idea and put it out there in front of an audience. And that was something that not everyone understood. I think a lot of people, when they first approached Kickstarter, just sort of saw like dollar signs in their eyes. And so, we as people on the community team were really spent a lot of time educating and helping people really think through, look, it's not just about money. The reward here is actually about being able to put something out there to either validate an idea or invalidate in some cases, and to really, see the rewards of putting yourself out there and actually trying something. And for some reason, that could oftentimes be a really hard thing for people to understand, especially because oftentimes what felt like the most important urge was this need for financing.
Talk a little bit about invalidating ideas, because that's really one of the core ideas we're exploring in game thinking, is how important it is to be a scientist with your mindset and be excited about finding out what's wrong with your idea as well as what's right. How does that actually play out on the front lines when you're in that kind of pressure cooker situation?
One of the things we saw constantly is that people would approach Kickstarter with something that they had been sitting on for a very, very long time. Some absolutely passion projects, things that had been kind of in that pressure cooker situation for very enormous amount of time, lots of effort had already put in. And so when someone kind of reached that, what they imagined as being the Kickstarter stage of things, they didn't want to change anything. Kind of approach with, all right, here's what I'm making, here's the goal, here's how I'm going to do it. Just tell me everything's good and let's get this going. People even had sort of a deadline already set in their mind where I'm like, I need this money by this date. And the reality is that once you really start putting something out there, almost every single part of it can potentially change depending on how the audience and community that you're working with reacts to that. And so helping people really navigate those changes, which sometimes meant letting go of certain things, could be really, really challenging, especially when you put a lot of upfront effort and time into it. So a specific example might be someone comes to us and they've already got their project video all put together. The pitch is there, it's 2.5 minutes. They spent a month with a videographer making it perfect, and then they show it to us and we give them some feedback, and it's like, hey, we noticed that you're not in this video at all. And it turns out it's really, really important for you, the creator, to be a voice in that experience and in that story. And so while that sort of feedback, might not be this kind of, oh my God, I never thought of that. When it comes to having to edit a video, people would get really freaked out and nervous. And it's one of those things where you recognize, look, When you start showing people something much earlier on, you can get that feedback in there before you start to overly cement things, and you have more flexibility. So the sort of advice that we would always give people is, the moment you start thinking you're going to put something out there, start talking about it. You don't have to tell people everything, but you need to start talking about it, because that's the only way you're going to start getting some of that real good, meaty, honest feedback at the right time when you actually need
So people are afraid of getting feedback.
it. Yeah.
Sounds like. And your story is such a perfect example of what happens when you put a lot of polish on something before you get feedback. So if those people had brought you a rough cut and said, hey, we'd like some feedback before we finish it, it would have been really different, which is such a great lesson for anybody building a creative project is, when you get that feedback. So how did you integrate that into the product? One of the stories that you've told me earlier is about saying no to a lot of ideas about competitive mechanics, the obvious gamification mechanics that often will juice short-term engagement but pollute your environment. So how did you navigate that? I'm fascinated by that because it's something very few companies do.
The mechanics that you're talking about are things that you really see quite frequently in a lot of tech products, stuff where you can get badges for being the first on something, or maybe there's a leaderboard, something that really calls out a more competitive way of working. With Kickstarter, we recognized very, very early on that level of competitiveness actually was frequently what would make people scared of actually trying. So this notion that, oh, wow, Spike Lee has a film project on Kickstarter. How could I, no-name film student, put something up next to Spike Lee? And the reality is that when you look at that as a competition, it doesn't make any sense. But when you look at it as collaboration and community, where it's like our audiences might actually have something in common. People who are interested in the type of philosophical work here might also connect with what I'm doing. It's a very, very different equation. And now you have more of a almost teacher and mentor relationship instead of one of I have to beat this person at their game. So knowing that sort of mentality was so important to getting people to really be willing to put themselves out there, we spent a lot of time making sure that the platform wasn't competitive and in fact was incredibly collaborative. So to some of my points earlier about helping people get over some of the fear of putting their work out there, one of the specific things that we did was create a sort of preview experience where people could share an early version of their campaign with select members of their community. They could send it to friends, they could send it to family, they could send it to strangers if they felt so bold. But the idea was, look, here is an unfinished product where very clearly you can see placeholder content, maybe the video is not there yet. And the goal of that is for people to go ahead and just jump in, leave the feedback, be brutally honest, and that's the whole point, because it's not live yet. The stakes are low, everything's okay, and really making that a core part of the experience. And so, as someone kind of onboards to the product, they kind of encounter the space of this is a sandbox. This is not a formula. This is not a prescription. This is for you to play with and use this as an opportunity to engage with different people on what you're doing.
That is such a good story. Here's the thing. And I know that filtering feedback is really tricky too. So not getting feedback early enough, there's one problem. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes you get too much feedback and you get contradictory feedback. And I'm sure many of your campaigners have dealt with this. And as someone running a community, I know you've dealt with it, right? So tell us how you think about sifting through and filtering feedback once you've got that deluge coming in.
Definitely a lot of feedback would come into us specifically about, I love Kickstarter. I want it to do this, this, and this, or I hate that this doesn't do that. A lot of those sorts of things. And anyone, again, who's worked with a community is familiar with the fact that if you've built something that's really useful, that people love, they're going to have really strong opinions about it. And that's a good thing. But the reality is that filtering that feedback and figuring out the right sort of moves to make, I think, is a combination of both, thinking through what is your vision for this experience and this product. And for Kickstarter, it was, this needs to always be a great home for creative people. period. It's broad strokes and it's high level, but that was always at the core of everything, every decision we made, every thought that we put into what product to build and what not to. And so when people came to us and they're like, hey, I wish that, I could create 10 projects at once and launch them all at the same time and have them all compete against each other. That would be really cool because then I can validate 10 different ideas. It was an interesting idea, but it didn't necessarily make sense for everyone else coming to Kickstarter. And so it was really always about balancing individual concerns against the sort of general health of the entire platform and the entire ecosystem. And so a lot of it really was about good governance and how do the different decisions that we make feed into that, and how does individual feedback become a part of that. And so if, a lot of people would give us pretty straightforward feedback about wanting more payment options, very practical, and really there's almost no reason not to do that. And that was something that could benefit, the entire ecosystem. And that's something that eventually we put a lot of effort into making sure there were options, because our audience was growing more and more international, meaning that not everyone had a credit card. Some people wanted to be able to use different forms of payment. So that stuff made a lot of sense. Whereas some of those more, as we talked about before, competitive game mechanics might have made sense for a certain subset, but really not for the ecosystem.
That's so interesting. You're really talking about system design. And one of the things about integrating feedback, just to highlight what you're saying, is as a community manager, architect, designer, and just as a designer in general, as a product designer of any product that's, changing over time, when feature requests come in and ideas come in, you're balancing against the ecosystem. And a lot of people don't know how to do that. They don't really understand that it's all a system. And so I get asked a lot, well, how can you learn system thinking? I didn't learn it in school or whatever. Did you pick that up on the job? Did you have a background that prepared you for that kind of system thinking?
I wouldn't say I formally had a background in that. I think a lot of it has to do with the fast education that I got inside Kickstarter, for sure. When I got there, there were about 50,000 users total. And within 4 years, we were at 10 million users. So when you think about that amount of growth in that amount of time, in order to really manage and scale properly, you don't really have a choice. You have to buckle in and see the long term and be not afraid of it. Just recognize, okay, we know where we want this to go. We know that we've created something special, and we know that we don't want it to fundamentally change despite the growth of this ecosystem. So in some ways, I kind of feel like trial by fire really was the master's program in systems thinking for everyone that was working at Kickstarter at that time.
Yeah, you don't have any alternative.
Yeah.
But that's cool, because what better way to learn than through a juicy project that you're sort of scrambling to stay on top of?
Yeah, totally.
And, I just so believe in project-based learning. And it's a great example. So you now you do workshops on your own, you see teams, you talk to teams, you advise teams, you forming your own teams. What are some of the most common mistakes that you're seeing teams make and product leaders make when they're bringing an idea to life?
I think something that I've seen a lot with especially sort of younger early entrepreneurs is this combination of like a deep passion for something, but also holding it really close and a sort of preciousness around it. And I think that's not uncommon really with anyone who's an entrepreneur and has been working on something and thinking about it almost 24/7 of moment where there might be evidence that's saying possibly even the opposite of something you've been thinking and wanting to do for so long is really, really hard. And I think that with these teams, especially when you have limited resources, it really is about making the right decision and the smart decision. And sometimes that isn't the decision you want. And that's hard. I think in a dream world, it'd be amazing to have like an infinite pile of money to be able to try out like the 10 different paths that you are pretty certain 7 out of 10 could be the right ones. But the reality is you might only get 1 or 2 shots. So being able to sort of withstand your own preciousness around an idea and just say, okay, I'm going to just listen to smart people, plus listen to my instinct and let that guide me. That's something that does take a bit of time and trial and error and learning to be able to master.
Did you go through that evolution yourself?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, both at Kickstarter and also sort of, in my own endeavors. I mentioned earlier that I'm working on my own startup right now. And I walked into it sort of with a mental map already figured out where, I'm going to sell rugs online. It's going to be a fully digital experience. I'm only going to sell 5 designs, and it's going to be great and perfect and exactly what I need and exactly what customers want. And as I have been doing more research into the industry and into customers, I'm learning a lot that's really challenging those assumptions, where my assumption was simplicity would be the best possible solution to a consumer need. But that's only a certain type of consumer. A different type of consumer actually wants more selection and more choice and more complexity. So, those are 2 different paths that I'm trying to think through how to navigate. Which way should I go, or can I find some way of solving both of these needs at the same time? But the reality is the original vision I walked in with is definitely changing, and it's going to keep changing.
Well, I think that's the red thread that runs through this whole conversation, is that combining that kind of ever-changing, the customer feedback's telling me this, with a strong core vision, and navigating that is definitely the path to success, and not easy.
Exactly.
So that's great. One last question. What do you see as your superpower as you approach this, as you look back on the amazing education you got at Kickstarter and what you're bringing to your next projects? What really lights you up?
If I had to name one thing, I think it's definitely, I love sort of helping people and understanding people and finding ways to kind of, bring together people with different talents and strengths to do something really cool. So in a weird way, as much as Kickstarter as a product was sort of a platform that enabled that, I feel like my own work was also about building a great team and leveraging the strengths that everyone had to kind of be able to do more than any of us individually would be able to do. And I see being an entrepreneur and building a business in very much the same way, where to CEO something is really about recognizing other people's strengths and letting them be good at what they do, and giving them the guidance when they need it to kind of nudge them in the right direction if they need that kind of guidance, but never sort of getting in the way of people being really great at what they do. So, if anything, in a very abstract way, I think, my interest in entrepreneurship and building businesses is really about the people. It's about the people you work with and the people you serve, whether that's the team you're building or the customer that you're trying to understand, ways to kind of get people to shine at what they do.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your stories and insights and wisdom with us. I love talking to you.
Thank you.